Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me. Today I will be discussing the lack of high-speed passenger rail across the state of Ohio. We will look at what is considered high-speed railways, Ohio's current passenger rail status, a brief history of passenger rail, policy impacting Ohio, and how Ohio could move forward with high-speed rail implementation. Although I know there has been talk about bringing high-speed rail to Ohio for a while, I took more interest in it after I took a vacation that included a long-distance train ride. While visiting the Canadian province of Quebec, I used Canada's national rail system called Via Rail to travel from Quebec City to Montreal. It was very pleasant. I didn't have to worry about the logistics of a car rental and potentially getting lost in the Canadian wilderness or the hassle of anything airline related. The $35 ticket was well within my budget. There were multiple stops along the way, and the top speed of Via Rail is 100 miles per hour, but the peace of mind and ease of use was well worth it. I think this mode of transport is underrated across the U.S. and wanted to look into why that is. So before we get to what is going on in Ohio, let's look at how high-speed rail is defined and its pros and cons. So what is high-speed rail? It is intercity passenger rail that achieves speeds of at least 110 miles per hour and runs on dedicated high-speed lines. It does not share tracks with freight railways. According to the U.S. Federal Railroad Administration definitions, Ohio proposals for high-speed rail to date fall in what would be considered the emerging corridors segment. This is for a line running through the state from Cincinnati, Columbus to Cleveland, and these three cities are less than 250 miles apart. Some pros of high-speed rail is it provides reliable and efficient transit for education, employment, and travel opportunities. It reduces travel time and emissions. It benefits public health by removing regional barriers and mental health by fostering social interaction. It is convenient for trips in the 100 to 600 mile range, trips that are perhaps a little too far to drive or not far enough to fly. The cons of high-speed rail is historically Ohio proposed options are for minimum speed standards, barely reaching 90 miles per hour. Environmental concerns are that high-speed rail is an inflexible mode. You cannot relocate a train station and tracks easily, whereas an airport can be built anywhere and the planes can come to it. Railroad tracks leave an environmental footprint. They need maintenance, and as opposed to airlines where planes do not need route maintenance because they're in the sky. High-speed rail does not meet needs of small rural communities. There are debates about if it should be funded by the government or privately, and Amtrak, the current national system, is not seen as profitable and lost money on 41 of 44 routes in 2008. So let's move on to Ohio. So currently in Ohio, there are two Amtrak routes in operation, the Cardinal Line and the Lakeshore Limited. As you can see, none of these go across the middle of Ohio. The Cardinal Line in Southwest Ohio goes through Cincinnati 3 times a week in the very early morning hours to ensure later stops in Indianapolis and Chicago or during daylight hours. There have been proposals to expand the Cardinal Line to daily service. The Lakeshore Limited Line runs daily east-west trains that can reach from platforms in Boston and New York to Chicago. In a 2024 Ohio Department of Transportation survey, over 75% of Ohioans support expanding passenger rail. Amtrak has proposed the 3C+D corridor route to link Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus, and Cleveland, which mirrors what the State of Ohio Rail Plan has been proposing for decades, going back to the 1990s. Locally, the Amtrak plan includes proposals for Sharonville, Hamilton, and Oxford stations. According to the advocacy group All Aboard Ohio, the potential economic impact of this plan includes Mobility University for students, because it would link campuses with hometowns and job markets, improve access to major events, such as concerts, sporting events, and conventions, alleviate highway congestion, and it would bring passenger rail to Columbus, the largest city in the U.S., without Amtrak service. Next, I am going to review transportation history related to passenger rail travel. Since Amtrak is a national railway, I wanted to explore passenger railroad history to see how we arrived at this point. Train travel was a frequent mode of long-distance transportation in the 19th and early 20th century, but with the development of automobiles and air travel, the demand for passenger rail began to decline. Construction of the U.S. highway interstate system began in the 1950s, and more people could purchase a car in the booming post-war years. Air travel was becoming more accessible as flight options expanded and fares became affordable. As a result, planes became preferable for long-distance travel and cars for convenience. While transportation improvements were made in these two sectors, the passenger rail carriers misjudged the market. These private rail operators did not adapt or invest in equipment for short-haul operations, travel over just a few hundred miles. Instead, they maintained a habit of investing in long-haul luxury trains with amenities such as sleeping cars, coaches, and lounges throughout the 1940s and 50s. And an Interstate Rail Commerce Commission policy in 1958 even prevented passenger rail operators from restructuring, as it refused to allow private operators to discontinue the use of long-haul passenger trains. Railroad companies were also a highly concentrated industry with barriers preventing new private firms from entering the market. And finally, the passenger rail carriers had a lack of incentive to correct their miscalculations because they relied primarily on freight rail for profits, not passenger services. In short, the private railroad carriers were stuck with offering passenger options that were no longer in their business interest. With passenger rail increasingly seen as not profitable, private rail carriers were relieved that the government created the National Amtrak system in 1970 to preserve remaining passenger service over a national system of routes. There was immediate discord because the program was federally funded. No private carriers wanted to be involved with Amtrak and what was seen as an obsolete technology. Railroad industry outsiders viewed support for Amtrak as advancing economic and social opportunities and believed passenger rail technology from other countries could be incorporated. Skeptics of Amtrak included fiscal conservatives, the freight railroad industry, and automobile and aviation industry executives. Their argument was the U.S. economic and spatial development needed the higher speeds of aircraft and the flexibility of automobiles. As a result, this led to Amtrak policy being turned into a sort of trench warfare over several decades. While federal policy made freight rail, which moves goods such as steel, chemicals, food, and cars, a priority and benefited it with deregulations, it has been historically inconsistent when it comes to Amtrak. There has been no clear government mandate to grow or shrink passenger rail. As the use of passenger rail declined, the knowledge of the infrastructure and technological capabilities became limited to Amtrak and the Federal Railroad Administration. Manufacturing technology inside the U.S. for building passenger trains and railroads and the administrative capacity to handle their implementation withered away. As a result, today passenger railroad policy and the how-to knowledge varies across states. In 2009, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act by President Obama included a vision for high-speed rail in America for distances of 100 to 600 miles. It included a Buy American policy to reinvest in the U.S. However, there was no technological capability in the U.S. to manufacture these trains. Instead, trains that are designed and manufactured in Canada and Europe are sent to the U.S. in kits for assembly. So you can imagine a literal life-size train set. So how do these policies affect Ohio today? In 2010, incoming Governor John Kasich rejected $400 million in federal funds from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act that was earmarked specifically for high-speed rail development. He cited the 79 mile per hour maximum speeds proposed and that it would drop to 39 miles per hour when multiple stops are factored in. These funds were not used and ultimately reclaimed by the federal government. The governor also withdrew Ohio from the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, a multi-state alliance that is critical for receiving federal funds. Right now, the 2-year state budget proposal released on June 7th removes language to rejoin the Midwest Passenger Rail Commission. and calls for eliminating a seat representing passenger rail on the Ohio Rail Development Commission. That commission currently has 11 of 15 seats filled, and the 4 vacant seats include 1 seat for passenger rail interests, 2 for general public, and 1 for freight rail. The state budget will be voted on and approved by June 30th. Earlier this month, Ohio U.S. Senator Bertie Moreno, whose past business ventures included owning multiple luxury car dealerships, suggested the U.S. government should cut Amtrak funding. There is a glimmer of hope, however, with the opening of the Chestnut Street Multimodal Station in Oxford this fall. This station will initially serve bus routes for the Butler County Regional Transit Authority, and in 2026, a platform for the Amtrak Cardinal Line will be operational. This was made possible through a collaboration between Amtrak, the City of Oxford, and Miami University. So what is next in Ohio? Can Ohio move forward with the 3C+D project? The major action step is to reach political agreement about funding, which is easier said than done. Secondly, the state would need to create the administrative capacity to implement high-speed rail plans. And these plans should be made to meet the minimum definition noted at the beginning of this presentation, 90 to 110 miles per hour, not scrape the bottom of the standards. A successful example of high-speed rail to look at can be found in Brightline, the only privately owned and operated intercity rail in the U.S. Brightline built a high-speed line from Orlando to Miami and is currently working on a project connecting Los Angeles and Las Vegas. Another example is the California high-speed rail plan that will connect Los Angeles to San Francisco, which has integrated funding from the state and federal government, and it is currently under construction. Manufacturing-wise, Siemens Mobility is building a facility in North Carolina this year to manufacture passenger rail trains, and will build a facility dedicated to high-speed rail production in New York State in 2026. And finally, if you are interested in staying up to date about Ohio's effort for high-speed rail or learning more, I recommend the website and social media accounts of the advocacy group All Aboard Ohio. Thank you for listening, and I hope you consider train travel in the future.